Now when I'm consulting with people, often the value that I'm bringing is helping them figure out, hey, here are the questions you can ask yourself to figure out how you are thinking things and what is everyone valuing and why are they valuing the things that they're valuing. Hi, I'm Divya,
Hi, I'm Karan.
and this is Thinking on Thinking.
That's funny. I was actually thinking about you while I was like lifting today because I was like doing bench press and I've not been able to like hit the goal my app has been telling me, and it's like very depressing about the way it tells you. It's like you have failed this combination of weights and reps twice before.
Wow.
We have now reduced the number of reps, and I was like, no, I will do it. And I was thinking about it because I think like something about how I feel because I was like, why did I never work out before? And it was because I always wondered, like, the possibility of what could be when I worked out consistently was more exciting than what I perceived the outcome was going to be. So I didn't want to like lose the imagination moment, right? And lose the moment where everything is a possibility. And I think that there's a certain, I can't decide, like the word that came to mind was blissfulness. There's a certain blissfulness, I guess, to like having infinite possibilities. And I know that there continues to be infinite possibilities, right? So like it's kind of a false perception to think that like once you start to go down a path that your number of possibilities are limited.
This is also one of the reasons why companies fail to make changes, especially the bigger they become.
They fail to realize they still have infinite possibilities in front of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like every choice becomes so loaded. Like the more further down the path you go, the more loaded each choice is. Right?
That's so
Like,
funny. I remember there was some like discussions in the pandemic, early in the pandemic, when like my sister's company had lost a lot of customers and there was almost no one coming on board, right? And we were thinking about just chucking the entire onboarding experience. And there was just so much resistance. I remember Tristan, who's our CTO, had just joined at that point, and he was like, guys, there's like 6 people using it. like we could just start over. And I don't think we ended up doing it, right? We ended up doing a very iterative approach because it was like we didn't want to jar the experience for people who had started it. But it, in retrospect, it's nonsense. It's complete and utter nonsense, right?
Yeah.
But it's hard. I mean, even what we talked about last week, I think, or I think it was a couple of weeks ago now, actually, or when I was running Vidya Next and thinking about what to do, the fact that we had spent so many crores on content weighed on my mind, right? Like I knew that we had built this content and the content was this valuable thing in this organization, and finding some way to it wasn't like I felt of it as guilt. It was like, this is one of my assets. How am I going to leverage this? Because I don't have that many assets, right? Like I need to leverage the assets that we have. Now, in the beginning you had no assets except for the possibilities. But then once you have them in hand, and I think this is exactly why it bothers me, right? Because once you have them in hand, it's so hard to escape from that feeling.
but isn't it just sunk cost fallacy?
It is.
I mean, part of it is sunk cost fallacy. Part of it, I also feel like is. So there was this thing when I was still like, in the point of decision of should we end up working together or not. I remember having this conversation with my sister and honestly feeling very scared. Oh, but what if I leave everything that I know and I go do something completely different, right? I've worked in a certain way, and like, what if I don't work in that way ever? And she was like, see, but you are thinking of it as like, oh, I'm living in India and now I'm gonna go and live in Greece. But it's honestly more like you know how to speak English and now you're learning how to speak Korean. Nobody can take away English from you. You have that knowledge and you have that information. And I'm not sure if that would be true for everyone at all times, for all decisions, but I think that that distinction is important. You're not going to forget how to speak English just because you learn Japanese. And our brain sometimes convinces us that a decision is moving to a different country rather than learning a different language.
I give you that for sure, right? I think that just like resonates with me when you say it. But I think the side that I'm thinking about from is a little bit different. It's like once you have like a mental conception of like say like what a tall building is, right? And I
Hmm.
say that because I have some tall buildings out my window, right? But that will start to color how you think of what tall buildings can be. That's why I almost feel like having this kind of reminder that like what you see is not what all of what there is. And I think having this notion in your head that there could be like this like there's an ultimate version of a building and these are just like shadows, right? It pushes you to keep thinking about like, well, how could this be better? I don't know. I don't know if it pushes you into thinking like reimagining what like the purpose of what a building is, and then
Hmm.
if that, and I think that is actually kind of the most useful side of the thinking. um
I also think that like um this was a conversation I was having with a friend last night. But I think oftentimes when we are reasoning through things, especially when we call like ourselves data driven or heuristics driven or whatever, we are confusing deductive reasoning with inductive reasoning.
Say more.
So deductive reasoning is like, 1 plus 1 equals 2. And it's always gonna be 2 because you can prove it.
Yeah,
Inductive reasoning is sun rises in the east every morning. So sun will continue to rise in the east
got
every
it.
morning.
Yeah.
And I feel like the conception of what is the ideal person, thing, company, project, product, building, it comes from past data and not imagining free form what possibly could be.
Apparently, I'm curious what you would say. I think you would say that this is deductive reasoning, but you know when um gosh, Jeff Bezos. It really took me a second. I was like, who started Amazon? Apparently, I was just reading this and that I'm like very slowly reading this biography of the IDEO founder. Or it's kind of
Hmm.
an autobiography, kind of the story of the company. And he talks about how when Bezos was starting Amazon, that he read this line that the web is growing at 230% per, sorry 2,300% per year. And when he understood that, he immediately got like flew to Texas or something, and he like bought a used car, and then he started like driving west. And like as he was like, this is like because he was starting the company in California,
Hmm.
but and as he was doing this, he like hadn't figured out entirely what would be the right thing, but he knew that there would be something you could sell online, and that something would be because this was creating a new channel where you
Hmm.
didn't have to maintain the inventory and the stock, right? And so he arrived at books and music, and then quickly launched books and then music. No, yeah. Would you say that that was like deduction around like, oh, look, here's this data around like
I
what?
mean, I think that was a lot of creative thinking. Like, I don't think that he arrived at it through just like, flat logic. Because it's not like, what is going to happen, but he asked what could happen. And
Yeah,
like, that's a
yeah, yeah.
subtle distinction. What's going to happen is more you're going towards a reasoning side. What could happen is like you're trying to construct something new, which is creativity, at least like just using that framework.
That's so interesting you say that. When I do a lot of creative work, to me, it feels like I am. There's a certain inevitability to it. So it's
Hmm.
just interesting the way that you framed that because I don't think about it like that. Like I never think about what could be with something. It's just like this is the right thing for this.
Interesting.
Like
I'm not surprised, but say more.
um, I think like there's a certain point, like when I write poetry, there's a certain like point where it just feels done, right? And that's why I was telling you once, I think that like I almost never revise any of my poetry, right? Maybe like a tiny bit, like I would say like one word for every 10 poems maybe, or even every like 30 poems, right?
Oh, wow.
But like yeah, it's like I'll change like a couple of words here and there, and usually it's like a tense or something. And
Hmm.
oftentimes like usually when I'm reading it, I'll remember that I was like upset about it when I
Hmm.
was writing it, and then like it will still like not. And for example, like in the book I just published, I changed the end of one. Oh, like I changed 3 lines, and now every time I read it, I can like I hear the original 3 lines in my head, like every single time. It's like it's funny because yeah. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's just like it feels like you're helping. I don't know. I think this is how I think about it. There's like a certain inevitability to it that you're helping something be created.
I was recently talking about this with my partner about how I don't think that I have a clear vision, especially when like it's things of pure creativity. I just start and it happens.
Yeah, but I feel like that's the same thing as what I'm saying, right?
No, not really. It doesn't feel like I'm uncovering something. It's almost like I'm meandering through a forest and I decide to stop and set up camp somewhere. And wherever I stop is wherever I stop. Like, honestly, the code that, you gave the Michelangelo example of, how sculptors bring out the sculpture, they just remove the
Yeah,
parts that weren't the sculpture, right?
yeah, for sure.
I relate a lot more with art is never finished, it's just abandoned.
That's really funny. um,
So, and it is not the same thing. Even though, of course, we both end up finishing things, I don't think it's the same perspective.
No, yeah. I think that's also why I don't always like to get like sometimes it's such a funny and very small example. But like when I was younger, my mom would like want me to like decide really like small things like what should we eat? And like I wouldn't want to commit to it because once I committed, then if we didn't eat that, I would feel more upset. But if I hadn't committed in my like if I hadn't right, if I hadn't realized that this was the right thing that one should be eating right now, then it's fine. But once you arrived at that, then it's very frustrating. More frustrating.
Interesting. Okay, so then I have a weird question. How does it feel to work together with me? Because I don't have that platonic ideal. Even when we have worked on things together, oftentimes you'd be like, "Oh my god, I don't know where this is gonna, what's this is gonna look like," and I am just like, it's gonna look fine. I'm sure it's gonna look okay. I'll do something, and I'll spend some time on it, and it will look fine after some time. But it's just like it's a very different approach.
Sometimes I can't see it all the way till when something is done, but I can see it a bit better.
Hmm.
So I think that's what happens in those situations is I end up shortening my perspective on where I'm trying to get it to.
Okay, say more.
Yeah, so when I feel like I can't like see the end of the journey, but I will be able to always see some milestone that I can help bring this to.
Hmm.
So then I just operate for that milestone. It's like an in-between platonic ideal if you want to think about it that way.
Interesting. Does it feel disorienting?
No, because I've had to do it in so many contexts in so many different ways. Because the world is like that.
But isn't the world like almost always trying to move towards a platonic ideal of everything? Like the perfect person, the perfect son, the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect husband, the perfect
Oh, it's
company, the
funny
perfect team member, everything.
because those I don't feel as much about like that those exist, I guess.
Okay.
It's like I feel like those are like the people are the variables,
Hmm.
not the constants.
As in, like, no one could be the perfect child.
Yeah. Whereas like there are other things that you could aspire to being because I guess things have to be perfect for their situation.
Okay.
Um and I think like there's no the like a perfect chair for me here in Bangalore is not going to be the same even for myself, right? A perfect chair in like I don't know Copenhagen, right? Or like a place that's dramatically different weather or climate, right?
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that like still I'm gonna have to create an example here that will be very tough for our listeners.
Yeah, yeah.
But like still when I'm in like maybe a space like even this there right now I'm working in kind of an L-shaped room, right? And I spend a lot of time just like thinking about the flow of that room because it feels to me this always happens to me, right? That I will move furniture around until it feels like things have arrived in a state that feels right, right? And it's not like, and I guess this is maybe how I would kind of answer what I was struggling with earlier. I think that it feels like almost like a local maxima, right? Like you read, maybe it's not. I don't feel a need to kind of chase the global one, really, but like I feel a need to get myself to at least a local one.
Do you not feel like the need to chase a global maxima, or do you feel like a global one does not exist?
I feel like if you let yourself start chasing, it never ends. So I almost enjoy more drawing the constraints in some way and then saying, well, here's my box. Now how will I?
So, like, I would say to that very dangerously sounds close to the evolution model.
Say more.
Like the way you're talking about this, right? Like the way you are saying there is a chair which might be perfect here, which wouldn't be perfect in a different condition. It's almost like there isn't a perfect chair. There is just a perfect chair for now. And then that could be applied to people and situations. Like there isn't a perfect meeting. There's just the meeting that you can have now. And how good that can, like, how best that can get.
I think that actually feels pretty right to me. Um, so I kind of just feel like, right, when people, so like if you're in a perfect place, if you're in a perfect mindset in a perfect place, like there is a great sort of way interactions can happen,
Hmm.
right? And a lot of times people are not in that place, right?
Hmm.
People are like, they're stressed, they're tired, they're right. And then those interactions like have a less likelihood of being as maybe positive or creating as much utility as they would if people were in a more available space.
Hmm.
So it's worth striving after that ideal, right? And being cognizant of like, when am I in a place that is compromising my ability to achieve that ideal?
Do you feel like the whole point of trying to strive to the ideal is because you are not sure what you would move towards if you didn't have that ideal? Like that it's
Uh,
just the direction of your vector?
I've never thought about it like that. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much like overarching personality goals, I guess, are like how much they actually manifest across different things. I don't
Hmm.
know. To share another example, I was listening to this podcast of a mathematician a couple of days ago, and he was talking about how he was very shy growing up, and then at one point he moved to France, and he realized that shy people are not as able to make friends and do well in life, and he decided he would not be shy anymore.
Hmm.
And he just like, right, and then over time he changed his personality, and so
Hmm.
he was like, yeah, so when people who knew me from when I lived in Japan, it was like they were a little bit like, this is strange, but then this is just like, so I do think there is some, obviously there is some truth to that, where people get like, or even you were telling me, I think a couple of months ago that you like, or sorry, a couple of years ago, you decided that you'd become more funny, and then you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. Yeah.
um Once you have an idea of your kind of direction, that then you can have this vector that is pushing you across different aspects of your life, right?
uh, I would have actually articulated it as sometimes we get stuck in particular directions and we can just decide that we don't have to have that. Like, this is a sort of side story, but so my closest friend and I, we have been friends for like 15 years, and we haven't had the kind of friendship where we're very warm and loving and caring and kind towards each other, but we don't joke around too much.
Okay.
And right around the time when I decided I want to be funnier was also the time when we decided, I think we should have like more lightness in our friendship.
Okay.
And recently we were having some very deep and serious conversation while both laughing and mocking at the thing at the same time. Like, oh my god, life is crude. Ha ha ha, it really is crude. And like we weren't being like false about it. We were actually finding it funny. And it was just really interesting how much that had changed. Or like, seeing, for example, my mom like now start to work out and like, start to take care of her body, which like in India most people do not. They don't have a
Yeah.
culture of like, learning to take care of their body, especially as you grow older. People are like, oh, now you just accept that old age your body is going to betray you.
Yeah.
And I just feel like a lot of this is your brain can get stuck in certain directions, but if you decide, then you can change it, which is why I think like my like normal thing is, there is no ideal. You just decide from a moment to moment basis as new data comes in, and you are able to make a better decision. Not the best decision, but a better decision. And better being fits your constraints more appropriately.
So you also don't even feel like there's an ideal version of yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Like I used to have it when I was much younger, but I think that like sometime while I was still in college and undergrad, it went away. I was just like, oh, I could be like, I took the switch from physics to design. And I could be a physicist, sure. I could also be a designer. I could also like I could live many lives.
That's interesting because like some things like for example, I was late to recording our podcast today because something came up right where I needed to go and meet someone, right, and I didn't really feel bad about that, right? Like I felt like these kinds of things happen, but when I realized that I had forgotten to upload our podcast, then I was like, this is not. I forgot to upload last week's podcast, right? So like this is not. There, I'm just like, oh, right, like it just makes me feel I'm like, oh, I need, like I wish I was better in my systems, like I wish, like, right, like there's things like I just remember things better, right, like it's not my ideal version of myself.
Hmm.
But you don't feel that way.
I mean, not never. Of course, like I do feel the feelings. We had a conversation last week where I was like, I am a really horrible person. um, but I think that like unless I'm in a very dark place mentally, it doesn't happen to me.
Interesting.
Like for me, honestly, it's more of a sign of, oh, you are probably moving slowly inching towards a depressive state.
That's so interesting. I was talking with one of my family members a week or so ago, and it was interesting because she was sharing with me like all of these behaviors she wished other people would do,
Hmm.
also in our family, right? And it was interesting because I usually don't think like that. I mean, sometimes I do, but not like frequently. Where I'm like, oh, I wish like this person would change their personality trait. Like for some reason, my pushing of idealness doesn't go to that.
Have you read this book about transactional analysis? I'm okay, you're okay.
No, I've heard a lot about transactional analysis too, and yeah, no, I have not read this book. Tell me about it.
So it's basically like there are four quadrants, right? So I'm not okay, you're not okay. I'm not okay, you're okay. I'm
Huh.
okay, you're not okay, and I'm okay, you're okay, right? Where it's like whose existence do you feel like is bringing the misery in your life? So for certain people, it would be like my existence is bringing misery, everyone else is fine. And for some people, it would be like everyone else is not okay. I am okay.
Oh,
Like I'm perfect. I'm fine. If only all of these other people didn't do the garbage things that they are doing and didn't indulge in the garbage behaviors that they are indulging in. And then there are people who would be like, I'm also not fine, you're also not fine, and we're all playing out our patterns. And according to at least like this psychoanalyst who wrote this book, he was like, you ideal like if you have processed things, then you would arrive at like I'm okay, you are okay, like you're gonna do your things and I'm gonna do my things, and misery is like yeah, inevitable kind of.
yeah.
Like of course cognitively these things are much easier to accept than emotionally, but yeah.
So I feel like you've had more experience with me in like working with a diversity of different kinds of companies, and I'm curious, like, how much do you feel like that kind of whether it's awareness as kind of maybe the first level, and then kind of being like just cognizant maybe about it. Like one is being awareness of yourself, and one is like kind of being cognizant of how is this happening in the culture of our company. Like, how much do you feel like those things have mattered to the kind of company's ability to execute or operationalize?
Have they mattered? A lot. Have people been aware of it? Very little.
Interesting. So sometimes they have situations that work well without realizing.
Yeah. I mean, so one of my friends, she was in an ed tech company. She was like one of the founding team members and was a part of the team, I think, for 8, 9 years or maybe 10, like somewhere around that mark. Um, and I think she is probably the one person who I have talked to who had a lot of models for interpersonal conflict resolution in teams and for like just figuring out things, getting people on the same page. And like a lot of it, like I don't know if you have discussed the 10, 100,000 thing on the podcast before, but like that's a model that I've gotten from her. There are other things that I've like learned from her, and a lot of it just starts from like building awareness in people. But I don't think that, like, at least the teams that I've worked with, most of the times they don't have those things either. Like,
Interesting.
now when I'm consulting with people, often the value that I'm bringing is helping them figure out, hey, here are the questions you can ask yourself to figure out how you are thinking things and what is everyone valuing and why are they valuing the things that they're valuing.
Yeah. Then I think about it, like I think a lot of the companies that we kind of were chatting with earlier this year and last year,
Hmm.
because people had conflict, people didn't know how to resolve it, and then the results of that after time become very strange in an organization, because you
Yeah.
have like sets of a company that don't really work well to each other, a lot of assumptions about what people's motivations are. It becomes a very crazy scene to try and unpack.
I also think that, like, a lot of times people don't understand the value of aftercare. Like, I'm borrowing a term from the BDSM community, but like, people really, really don't get the idea that you can quote unquote resolve a conflict and still not feel okay, because there is some friction that has caused abrasion on your bond with the person.
Yeah.
And you need to do something to, like, ease that friction. Like, you need to do something to make that pain go away. Even like just resolving the core issue is not going to be enough, and not in a bad
Interesting.
way.
I feel like the thing my father has been very good at in a lot of the companies he has had is creating spaces and expectations for people to behave in other ways. So like there's always just been this tradition that like there will always be like a TT tournament happening in the office at all times somewhere. There's like just so many TT tables, right? And then like Aditi, which was his first company, always had like they had an annual day which like you were meant to bring your family, and then they would have like the Aditi day that was like a party to like drink, and like there's just like many environments that you would see people behaving outside of their just like classic work
Hmm.
environment. And I think even when I worked in some of the satellite offices, like I worked in the London office, and the London office just had this really strong culture that we all went out for drinks every day or nearly every day. And it got crazy. I mean, I was at a certain point in my life where I could have 2 large whiskeys with my boss, but for other people, it was kind of crazy, because what are you going to do if your boss is having 2 large whiskeys? You're going to have 2 large whiskeys too, and it's hard to do it. It means you're a little bit drunk when you're going home to your family. Um, but it made you see everyone in a certain, right? Like after it happens day after day, it's not like, oh, this person got drunk. Like everyone gotten a little bit drunk. Everyone's done something kind of stupid, or like
Hmm.
spilled their drink or their chips or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know, but when I think about it from myself, and I'd be curious if you also think in that way, I always end up thinking a lot in terms of like structural incentives, and how like how is the environment being created around people, expecting them to work in a certain way. Because I always just come from that, my starting kind of lens, if you will, is that kind of place where I'm like, well, what incentives have we done and what behaviors are we expecting? And therefore, is it crazy to imagine this person is going to behave in a different way when everything, the structure around it, is expecting them to behave in that way?
Hmm. I I feel like I have overlap with that, especially like if I put on my game designer cap, then I start thinking, okay, how is the system sort of incentivizing people? Like, what motivations are intrinsic, what motivations are extrinsic, and like what behaviors that would lead to. But honestly, I also think internally I try to come from a place of personal agency, not personal responsibility. I think responsibility is always of the system, but I think agency can be on every single person in the team.
That's so interesting. It's funny because I keep so much agency for myself, but then I very often, I think especially when I'm working with people, I like forget about their agency. I don't know, or rather, I take the responsibility to make the path that I think is the right path the easiest.
Hmm. I mean, I don't know if this is the right spot to sort of close our conversation on, but I think something that I've been learning recently in my life has been not to make decisions for other people. Like, have some humility and like not make choices for other people, thinking that, oh, this is in your best interest.
Yeah, no, I know when you say it like that, obviously it feels very obvious, right? Like that, like yes. But I think what I was trying to say is like, how are you thinking through the situations you're creating for your people, And I think that
Hmm.
there's this ability for where people would be like, yeah, right, you can make your own choices. And it's like, well, can you? Like, how much have you enabled for them to make their own choices? You know?
Very
And
fair.
I think, yeah, and I think that responsibility kind of starts to come to you as you like manage people, as you employ people. Like, how much are you enabling them to have agency?
No,
Are
that's
they-
a very
otherwise-
fair point. It's very easy to sort of like push it. It's one of those things where like, oh, women should speak out in the office more. And it's like, well, sure, but is the thing that is stopping women empowerment women? Like, let's really question that. No, that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, see, look, here also we've arrived at the same conclusion from slightly different points.
Indeed.
Yeah, but I think that's what keeps it so interesting. I think when you can find someone who, like, you know, you have enough overlap with that you're able to understand where they're coming from, but then you have enough differences that it's always interesting to understand their perspective. It's just like it's endlessly entertaining
Yeah.
because there's endless possibilities.
Yeah. And on this note, I think we
Lovely.
can say bye. And we can have like maybe more conversation around this idea of like coming from different perspective would be interesting at some point in the future.
Yeah, I think talking about some of these things in more specific will also be interesting.
Yes. Okay, let's
Okay.
talk about that sometime.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Talk soon. Bye.
Yes. Thanks for listening to this episode of Thinking on Thinking. Our theme music is by Steve Combs, and you can find a link to it in the show notes.